Rounding out the third quarter of 2021, the month of September, taxes go up again as the government passes an increase in national insurance to pay for social care. The money is immediately swallowed by the National Health Service, however. The idea seems to be that in 3 years' time, the National Health Service will graciously give that back and it will then be focused on social care. Furlough is wound down. And just to prove that we learn nothing from the panic buying of toilet paper during COVID, panic buying of fuel breaks out, leading to long queues and shortages at the pump. There was also a reshuffle, some big moves. Dom Rahab, Deputy Prime Minister, moves to Justice. Liz Truss moves from Trade to the Foreign Office. Some big non-moves. Priti Patel stays at the Home Office. Rishi Sunak stays at the Treasury as Chancellor, despite signs of perhaps growing rifts with the PM. The furlough schemes ends. That's cost nearly £70 billion. To talk us through what happened in the month of September and was it a vintage month or a terrible one, I'm delighted to be joined by Labour councillor and author at Brexit Central, Brendan Chilton. Brendan, welcome. And political broadcaster and commentator Mahyar Tousi. Good to have you with us. Brendan, let me start with you from the other side of the aisle, as it was. What did you make of the reshuffle, the first really major one?
Well, it seemed to me that all the people that should have been moved weren't, and all the people that were moved didn't need to be. Mm-hmm. I think this is probably more, as I say, I say this as a non-conservative, I think this is more to do with how popular some of those that should have been moved are with the grassroots. Mm-hmm. Priti Patel is presents as being a pretty firm Home Secretary, despite the fact that I don't think she is at all, yet managed to keep her job. And there are others like Liz Truss, who I think her political capital has really risen. And I think she's done a reasonable job since her new appointment. And so it was an eventful occasion. I think, though, that it didn't do much to re-energise the government. I think they'd been stagnating over the past year, and particularly as we were moving out of the restrictions. And I think, the hope was that it would revitalise the government, give a new, fresh face. But when a government's been in for 11 years with various characters around, it's quite difficult to do that. But I think it could have been a more powerful reshuffle.
Mahyar, you as a kind of political commentator and broadcaster, everybody pulls through the tea leaves, right, whenever there's a reshuffle. What does this mean? And tries to discern, as Brendan was saying, some potential new direction of travel. Is it actually just a rearrangement of the furniture and a few faces sitting at different seats? Or can we look at the September reshuffle as signalling, leaning in one direction rather than another?
Usually some meaningless reshuffles are that, but this time you can't even say it was that. It was just invisible, in a sense that there are, as you said, that there were names that should have been moved. I mean, one person should have been moved, but he can't really move himself because I think he's Prime Minister. But he has tried to work hard. But I mean, there are in terms of Treasury, one of the main areas we're going to discuss tax and those situations is that we do need more sound money people in there. The names like Steve Baker and these guys who could actually get into Treasury, for example, they need to get more important jobs. The Priti Patel situation is quite fascinating because this government knows that one of the biggest priorities is actually immigration and border control. Yet, that's the one area that they keep delaying and delaying. I'm not really sure how that's going to basically come back, really.
I didn't do it at the outset, but I'll do them now. My high point of the month, low point of the month, and banter moment of the month. Right. My high point of the month, I think, what probably was Liz Truss being made Foreign Secretary. I think she's done a very good job at trade. And almost therefore sorry to lose her from that, but and she's a friend of mine as well, so I was glad to see her get a top job. Low point of the month, and this is what I want to come on to, more tax increases. Government votes for a rise in national insurance, an explicit breach of the Conservative Party manifesto commitment. Banter of the month, Lee Anderson MP, you can always count on him, calls on the PM to deploy water cannons against Extinction Rebellion protesters. Right, that I think is the banter one. Let me talk a little about the tax increases. This social care problem has been, it's been there forever. Nobody's ever sort of dealt with it. Brendan, was this the right way to deal with it? Let's hike up national insurance. I mean, you could almost say, if I'm playing devil's advocate defending the government here, that's sort of what national insurance is for. You're supposed to put a bit aside and it pays for social care down the line. Were you a fan of this approach?
I wasn't, and I think the problem we've got here, and it doesn't matter whether you're Labour, Conservative or somewhere in between, there is never going to be enough money from the public taxation to pay for what we need in social care. It's a bit like the NHS. It will become a huge cash cow that will just require more and more money. I don't think any tax rises at the moment are sensible because our recovery, despite the fact it's gone reasonable, the public finances are not great, debt's going through the roof, and the last thing we need to be doing is raising taxes at this point. I think we're going to have to look at some sort of hybrid model of public and private funding of social care in this country, simply because we have an ageing population and there's no sign that that trend is changing. It's only going to get worse. And so if we rely wholly on taxation for this, we are just not going to be able to fund it.
Well, you're a libertarian kind of guy, so what's your libertarian answer to the social care problem? We know because of the changing demographics that people are going to live longer. This is a good thing.
Yeah.
There will be problems with people getting ill. That's a healthcare issue, but there's a huge potential bill on people needing help because they're going to live longer but get frailer. How does a libertarian solve that?
I mean, there's always these arguments that we could always have when it comes to healthcare and social care, different models. Swedish model is actually pretty good in terms of the hybrid, as you said, have a basic safety net, but actually incentivize the private sector to actually allow to cover most of it. And then there are different debates we could have. Like, we don't have to copy and paste. We could just get different areas from Switzerland and Sweden and kind of mix and match. But the biggest argument is actually the political side of it. The Tories, and who are, generally speaking, they still say we're good, fiscally conservative. We kind of understand we can't just spend money. We have to also reform. Even the coalition government tried to do that more than this government. I know the Andrew Lansley stuff didn't really go down well, but at least they were brave enough to decide to touch the NHS to an extent. Right now, you're just throwing money at it. Nothing actually changes. And one of the problems I have is that the national insurance rise, or the VAT rise, for example, that was announced, the corporation tax rise that was announced a while ago, everything was political. It came out from the Treasury about number 11 that it's just a political move. In about 2-3 years' time, Rishi's going to come back and say, actually, we're not doing that. Why do you have to make everything political? Like, I understand there's politics involved, that you need to just kind of get the budget go through to make sure you don't really go down in the polls.
But the tax system's become a form of virtue signalling.
Exactly, yeah, they're becoming a political tool, which is really weird because it never happened like this. Everything else was a political tool. Like, the NHS was always a political tool, immigration was.
But tax is based
policy,
on maths.
yeah, it's logic. You can't just play with it. But
it was based on maths, no. But these were back in the days when the world was rational and based on basic laws of science. You remember those?
Yeah, we used to follow
just about.
Just on the social care thing again, Brendan. I know we're asking you guys to look at this particular month for us, the month of September. But if I look back, let's look back to the 2017 election, when Theresa May's manifesto came up with something, in my view, approaching the solution. I didn't agree with much of the manifesto, but the one bit I did agree with was the most unpopular part of it. That if you own a house or have got assets in your old age and you need social care, why isn't that traded off against the assets? Just to be clear here, I'm not sure you should be forced out of your house, but you could potentially transfer the cost of social care onto inheritance tax, or when you choose to downsize. I don't want to force elderly people to have to, even if they don't want to, but it seems to me we've now got an elderly population who are richer than ever before. And therefore, if they need the social care, which they clearly do, isn't it reasonable to use their assets as some sort of leverage against that, rather than putting a tax on people of working age? That seems to me a Ponzi scheme.
Well, of course, that was what did really for Theresa May in that election. She went in calling that election, thinking she was going to get this huge majority, and that social care plan was announced and the wheels came off. I think the model you're suggesting there, and actually the one she suggests, is quite fair. Why should younger people right now who can't afford a deposit for a mortgage, who are being paid tuppence, who are seeing all their day-to-day freedoms restricted because of the pandemic that we've experienced, and this is ongoing now, have to pay for a care system that they're not going to use for probably 50, 60 years, and yet you've got an older population, particularly in London and the South East, who've got a lot of them very good assets because their property prices are going up so much. I think that would be a satisfactory solution, but unfortunately it didn't do for her in that election.
Yeah, and we're no longer in the age of rationality.
No.
Of course, other big bit of government spending, I mentioned this at the top of this segment, the furlough scheme starts to wind down in September. Again, I instinctively against these. I don't like governments bailing out companies, although on the other hand, if you're basically telling, if the government's saying that you can't work, it seems to me that you're entitled to some compensation. Full disclosure, the IEA did take advantage of the scheme. And on that basis, the government's preventing us going about our normal business, so we'll take compensation for that. But do you think, Mahyar, it should have ended earlier? I could understand that the sort of idea was we'll put all of these jobs into formaldehyde and, they'll bounce back at the end of the scheme. But by the time we wound down the programme, 70% of firms were finding it difficult to recruit staff.
I think it's not just they should have had it like short term from day one. Because let's be objective, like March 2020, when the whole thing started here and the first lockdown, in defense of the establishment government, they didn't know how it's going to go overall. Things could change. We could have variants and whatever, right? But so you can't just say, oh, they should have just had like a 3 month, 2 months furlough and that's it. But they should have had backup options like plan B, plan C, plan D for this sort of stuff. I'm not really in favor of plan B's, plan C's, but for this sort of stuff, they should have had it. So for example, post-May, post-September, Christmas 2020, if this happens, we could do this. To have some sort of actual plan, for example, spending on furlough, so that you could also easily reverse it or easily not implement it. That's the biggest problem. They keep politics and our Western democracy is based on short-termism because of the elections that we have. It's not just short-termism anymore. It's also, it's not my problem, as Rishi Sunak would say, or Boris Johnson would say, it's future Boris and Rishi's problem. And say, they'll deal with it in 2 weeks' time.
You only operate on a cycle of
it's disgusting.
A very short cycle. What was your take on the furlough scheme and whether it went on to, I was betwixt and between, because I could see the rationale for it. If you're stopping businesses from operating, then you've got to, what do you do with the waiting staff in a restaurant?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was opposed to a lockdown from the start. I didn't think it was right that businesses were essentially put out of action because to do that, what we were doing was borrowing huge amounts of money. Again, the figures are just unimaginable. I can't even imagine what 400 billion looks like. And this was actually a debt scheme because it was all borrowed. And instead of calling it, furlough to keep people paid, it was a debt scheme. All that was borrowed money that's now got to be paid back, or we've got to grow our economy fast enough so it cancels it out. I wanted furlough to end sooner. I think particularly in the summer months, there were pubs, restaurants, bars that could have opened because they had the gardens and outside spaces and things like this. You could have had social distancing in theatres and cinemas, etc.
And of course, the flip side of furlough kind of protects jobs and you hope they bounce back. The flip side is it glues up the labour market, right?
Yes.
The labour market is always a huge turnover of jobs, and we've seen less of that because whilst you're on furlough at whatever, 70, 80% of your salary, I mean, you're not
it's the same with the concept of working from home. It's the same thing that, when you had working from home for such a long time, a lot of people were like, I don't want to go back to the office. If you make people dependent on something, it's difficult to take it away.
Well, if you give people money, just give them money and say stay at home. Put you in that, and in that summer, the first lockdown, when everyone was having gin and tonics in their garden at 3 o'clock because the weather was great, it was all nice. You have a good time. But actually, now the chickens are coming home to roost. We're looking at the tax rises as a result of this. We're looking at, potentially other freedoms going if new variants emerge. So not a good picture at all.
So pretty expensive month and a reshuffle that doesn't really change anything, Mahyar. That would be your audit of it.
Yes,
basically, again, good times.
Yes.
And I finish each segment by asking our guests to rate the year out of 10. 0 is the worst number you can give. 10 is nothing could possibly have been any better than 2021 was. So taking yourselves out of April, but bearing April in mind, Brendan, let me start with you. Out of 10, how good or bad was 2021?
Purely because we had the vaccines, which in theory let all this go back relatively to normal, I'm going to say a 6. 6, pretty much a 6.
Yeah, if I say 2020 was 3, I would say 2021 was 5, 6.
Yeah, that's roughly.
I need an exact number. 5 or 6.
5.5. I can't go 6. The same number. 5. I'll go with
5. Middle of the road.
No, actually, no. Sorry, I'm the optimist. 7.
7.
Yeah, 7.
Sudden, that's inflation for you. It went from 5 to 7 in a second. Jeez.
Because it wasn't as bad. There were a lot of good stuff that happened again. Because I keep comparing it to 2020.
We did get to the semi-final, didn't we? Final.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we stopped the boats. Well, for one day. One day, but that was
it. So, an upbeat.
We deported 5 Foreign criminals, that was good. But yeah.
So, well, things to be cheerful for, but next year will be even better. Right, gentlemen? We're confident about that? No, Brendan.
Well, yeah.
Putting a massive...
Prime Minister Liz Truss, when she gets there, everything will be perfect.
There you go. Things to look forward to. It being Christmas, Mark, share a Christmas cracker with me.
Oh, okay, I'm going to lose that.
Go on, win.
See?
It didn't even pop. That is an omen for next year.
Yeah,
it didn't even pop.
And we have our IEA economics jokes in the Christmas cracker.
No.
So, what are the 2 scientific laws of economics? Do you know, gentlemen?
Not a clue.
I didn't know this
It's a
one.
trick
either.
question because it's economics is not hard science.
The first 2 scientific laws of economics. For each economist, there's supposed to exist an equal and opposite economist. That's the first law. And the second law suggests they're both wrong.
Well, that's
There you go. They're not getting any better, these Christmas crackers. Mahyar, Brendan, thanks so much for joining us. Have a very, very Merry Christmas. And here's to a much happier 2020.
Merry Christmas to you
Thanks very
too,
much
Mark.
indeed, gentlemen. Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.